Atlanta, Georgia. We have Dr. Diane Oliva Caceres. She's a founder and CEO of Market Access International. Doug Wood, an international trade and economic development consultant, also based in Atlanta. And Crystal Porter, principal of Market Access International and based in Georgia. And we have worked on many projects together. In Halifax here, there's myself as Managing Director of Market Access International Canada, and Sheila McDougall, who handles all things administrative and is also responsible for putting together this document as the document editor on the project. So collectively, we just call ourselves MAI, and that usually refers to a combination of both companies. So just reviewing today's agenda. We've done the introductions, but we'll, on the virtual trade side, we just really want to have a look at the context for this study. You know, we were out there looking at virtual trade activity, and that encompasses a number of different kinds of activities, different kinds of events, and addressing different industries. So it's a pretty comprehensive concept. And so some of the best practices that are identified might be more suited to one activity than to another. But essentially that's what happens when you're looking at a broad territory like this for the study. We did review all of the literature available, secondary research on this. There were some interesting articles, but interestingly enough, and congrats to folks from Atlantic Canada, but no one is really looking at the issue of best practices from a government or delivery agency led delegation. Most of the material addresses how technology providers can sell technology to organizers. And so it's all about how this technology makes your event better. And tangentially, it kind of looks at how it affects the companies that are exhibiting, but only in a kind of battle to see who's got the best features in an effort to generate revenues from trade show organizers. So it's a little bit different. Also, there's very little talk about trade missions. Almost everything has to do with trade shows or virtual conferences, hybrid conferences, etc. So in those two key ways in which Atlantic Canada is concerned about events that are focused on companies but led by government or delivery agencies as head of delegation, and the extent to which we're looking at trade missions are kind of unique for Atlantic Canada. So obviously there are implications for business, and this project will drill down through a lot of what those implications are as business gets ready to face the future. And then there's implications for government. Basically, there is short-term change required, and we're going to go through some of that, but has to do with incorporating becoming masters of the technology, both on the company side and on the government side, to be able to really appreciate what companies are going through and plan your strategy around what the actual event is going to deliver. So there is some coming to grips with technology in the short term, but once that's done, once that's learned, it becomes routine, and then we can really move on to the impact that virtual trade is having on how we do business, and where our contention is that it opens up the door for a greatly enhanced collaboration, which really becomes a strategy in the go forward. And so throughout, we'll be looking at the various checklists and toolkits. The original, the project commenced with a document that really looked at all of the best practices that were out there from a variety of viewpoints. Then there was a creation of some toolkits and checklists that would enable people to implement some of those best practices, and now is evolved into the PowerPoint to really look at, primarily in this case, how governments can use these checklists. But in doing that, we're really looking at how companies will use them as well. So you have an appreciation for what the companies are going through, and then how government would use it in the go forward. Now we're going to move over to Doug, who's going to discuss types of virtual trade activity.
Thanks, Bruce. So in the way we've kind of defined the types of virtual trade activities, we have the virtual trade missions, which are missions that are run by the government, and are able to control that. We have virtual trade shows, which are external events that we attend that are hosted by a third party and that have been normal to attend over the years. We have virtual conferences, which are just seminars or a conference themselves without a B2B component. We have the B2B sales calls, which is just the traditional day-to-day work of having a sales call via an online system. We have hybrid events, which really haven't happened, but we do see them coming, which are people in person and also combining that with the virtual. And then we have virtual supplier food showcase events, which have a different component in factoring how samples work out. Next slide. So we have the virtual trade mission. As I had said, this is with events that you are currently organizing for your businesses, or you have obviously a contractor doing that for you. You get to define the geographic market that you're going into. You get the B2B and design how you want to do that. You have control over, and you have to have the support built for the in-market partners to support that type of business that's going on, using it from past missions before COVID came through. And then you get to decide if it's multi-sector or single sector. And those are all within your control of determining it, which also gives you the advantage of you build the community. So you know the businesses that are participating. There is no unknown there. You know your businesses, and you know the ones that are joining from whatever region you're working with. So that really gives you an advantage there. And having that complete control, and allows you to do a lot of the analysis that we'll talk about later on the analytical side of who's coming and how long they're spending, and making sure that's a part of this system. Next. So the virtual trade show is a little bit more complicated in the sense that you don't get to control the platform, and you have to use the platform that's established by the organizer. And you have to understand that platform as well as you understand your own, so you can support your businesses adequately. So you have the program itself, how the interaction will happen. You have the costs that go with that. Some events, as I assume a number of you have seen, you can have a trade show booth, or you can have access to upload documents for your company, but they'll charge you for each document. So the budget can go out of control and go out of alignment very quickly if you're not monitoring that and established the guardrails around what you want to do and what access you want to give your companies during that. The attendees, you're not, I mean, while there's a good faith assumption that you'll have qualified leads in the B2B, you don't control that. It's the conference that controls that, and you have different people walking into your exhibit space or signing up for B2Bs that hopefully are qualified, but it isn't guaranteed. The sector, is defined by what you're doing, but it's usually a sector oriented. The size, you don't control that size. It could be promoted as a large event. It could end up being a small event. It could be a small event. You just don't have that. The virtual trade mission moves on then, and you get to go ahead and, where are we? You just kind of.
I'm sorry, I popped ahead there, Doug.
Okay, no, we were fine. So the virtual conferences, what we go through is a set program of speakers and presentations. This allows for companies in Atlantic Canada to become presenters or become authority figures on a given topic and hopefully attract soft sell business through that. The audience, they get to evaluate that, and hopefully they're able to gain insights of who's being available in that. Sometimes there's a B2B option, but a lot of it's networking. And so they have to be comfortable in doing that during breaks, and how you communicate in these chat rooms as people approach, how you capture, evaluating how you capture who you're talking to at that time. And then, as I said, the presentation opportunities. So it's a softer sell, but it's a great way. Will they be able to capture, for example, a question, will they be able to capture the video that's being used during the seminar to promote their own business in other ways in the future? So it's something to think about and account for. All right. The B2B sales call is basically the essence of a company's sales that it continues day to day. People have moved over to that, but how the company manages that, how they're deciding to deal with that. And this comes back to, again, the tools that we're building to support our companies doing virtual trade shows. They all should be thought of as being used for day-to-day business sales calls. So making sure that the branding and the messaging relates, and then they can use that seamlessly is a very important aspect of that. Next slide. And now we have the hybrid events, and this is what we see in the future, where we're going to have face-to-face meetings, but then we're going to have these hybrid events where people both will be happening at the same time. People will be in person, people will be sharing online. All the tools that we developed throughout this presentation and go over today will be applicable to this. And this is likely to be here long-term as a set component. We can see it for a number of reasons, just not cost and convenience and functionality. This seems to be a growing segment, and it will probably be the lasting impact of this. The virtual food supply showcase, custom technology, the B2B provided, but it's really the custom follow-up. And then it's how are we thinking about samples, and how have we talked about that with the companies? Have we done preset boxes? What do those boxes look like? What does the material look like? I mean, there's a presentation when you're at a trade show and you're displaying food, right? That has an attraction to it. Well, is that going to be replicated in the samples that are sent there? Are we looking at a branded box? Are we looking at a regional branded box to be used? And then you open it up and you have the products there. Are we allowing each company to do that on their own? Have we talked through, are they prepackaged? Are we pre-forwarding them to the region, and so only someone has to put a label on them and they go out? Or are we doing that back in the office? And this really has to happen with immediacy. So it's a different aspect of that as we go through it. And I think it really lends to it, but yeah. Oh, I want to go back on one thing before that. I forgot on that virtual supplier food case. There's a site, and I assume a lot of us have used it, RangeMe, where corporations in the US, grocery stores like Ingles or other ones out of North Carolina, have moved to let RangeMe do all of their in-house procurement. The procurement officer will look at the products through that site to make sure they're certified, they have all the paperwork, and that's only growing as a business category. But they're controlling those relationships. And so it's a different platform, and I can see that moving out into other industries where you wouldn't go to the store to register your product and send your sample. You have to go through a third party to get there. All right. Thank you, Bruce.
Now, Diane.
Diane?
Thanks so much, Doug and Bruce. So now we're just going to be easing into the next topic, which actually flows from what Doug was just describing, which is that all of these different virtual trade activities do evolve and they generate best practices. So, for example, and we know that these VTAs, there are so many innovations around the technology and the different types of formats of events that can be generated. And technology is underpinning this process. And you'll see in the toolkit report that there's an example there, an industry case study covering bio, which pivoted to fully virtual. And I think, Jeff, you're on the line here, which is great to see your name and others who I interviewed. It was an interesting case, I felt, when you described how you worked with your companies to prepare them in terms of hiring a consultant to help them navigate the technology, as well as hiring a separate company to develop those very professionally done, persuasive 3-minute videos that are then pitched from the biotech company startup to big pharma, and creating value for the participants from PEI in Atlantic Canada, and really encouraging your participants to take the initiative and the responsibility to prepare to effectively manage their participation in bio. And so I thought that was an interesting, because bio actually had the range of opportunities that you could think of associated with a trade show. It had the plenary sessions, panel discussions, B2B opportunities to pitch, and networking as well. And though their technology, I understand they use 2 different platforms, one for the B2B and one for the actual conference, and that can be a challenge sometimes. Still, there's an opportunity there for firms to get the necessary preparation in advance. And I heard some of those lessons learned that you were recounting to me, and best practices there in that example. So the point here with the changing constantly these VTAs, that's something you'll have to keep up with constantly, to Bruce's point in the beginning there, in terms of long-term change and management of it. Another best practices that we see sort of evolving is the fact that these VTAs now have incorporated multilingual events. And because of this, markets have opened, right? It's a little easier now to be able to have, say, a trade mission virtual or trade show with French counterparts in French as well as in English. Also, the variety of events has increased in terms of the nature, just the few that Doug mentioned, but different events can be designed for different types of customers, different industries, and each of those virtual trade, let's call them activities, could and do use the technology that is relevant for the industry. So for example, with ocean tech companies, their ability to share 3D technology online or use, demonstrate their products online using 3D technology is important. For architectural firms, sharing data files online through the virtual trade activity platform is important. Food products, as Doug mentioned, will have a different requirement technically there. So the variety of types of events has increased because also the technology is there to support the very specific requirements of each industry and customer segment. And that kind of leads to the fact that the event technology platform partially defines the event. And you'll see there's a technology checklist. I think we can show it next in the toolkit, which outlines some things to consider when you're assessing the virtual technology event. So for example, I'm just going to highlight a few points here. When you as a government agency are controlling the event, you want to start from the beginning to take a comprehensive look at what the requirements are and your desired outcomes. And you should ask all kinds of questions about what you'd like the technology to do, from group registration and payment through event promotion and communication, all the way to program delivery with webinars, meetings, and schedules, etc. So that comprehensive look from the very beginning. I'm just going to pick another key point, I think, which is have realistic expectations of the event technology in terms of what it can and can't do for the activity. So there's always room for improvement, but understand the difference between what is required and what is nice to have. And later, Bruce will show you a slide on comparing different technology platforms and their desired characteristic requirements and what is nice to have and so forth. And other things like, for example, to ask yourself, can the attendees actually request one-on-one meetings beforehand, during, or afterwards? What is the system, the technology in place to enable that process? So there is this checklist that we have put together and is available to you in the toolkit. Next slide. This is the one I'm just going to briefly mention again. This is where we compare the platforms across each other, and Bruce will get into more detail there. This slide, now we're looking at a visual here that shows us the planning cycle. And I'm going to ask you to look first at the new technology or new event point, if you will, and that's where we sort of start. And you can see that each step feeds into the next. So there's a sort of circle that this continuous feedback around best practices, but and you see here where evaluations do drive evolution and the industry in transition. So here it's really important when you're evaluating and identifying those innovations and changes in best practices, compare with what you know, and then continue to think about maybe evaluating new technologies that have been developed prior, and begin to plan accordingly for future events, future virtual trade activities, and research and this research is an important segment here because you're going to be conducting research on an ongoing basis, because industries will change more quickly now with this digital technology underpinning industry change, separate from VTAs here, but also the researching pre-event, pre-recruitment, prospect research, and post-recruitment, target prospect research, very important part of this planning cycle. And then the recruitment, that research will lead to more effective ways of recruiting the right companies who are either new to market or expanding an existing market. And this recruitment process actually leads to also impacting the kinds of consultants you may want to hire through the RFP process as partners, how you're going to collaborate with other organizations to be able to recruit the most appropriate participants for the virtual trade activity. You've been doing this already in the past, especially if you're industry specific and you know your companies in the food industry or bio or transportation and so forth. But here we're talking about an even more focused approach towards recruiting companies who are can be parsed actually into even more specific categories. So you're getting even new companies just starting out. How are you going to prepare them for their participation in an event like bio versus the veteran that's been going every year? So also the implementation phase, very important. when it comes to just those lessons learned and evaluating again the results and repeating that entire cycle. So it's a continuous cycle. What is learned in researching opportunities, new technologies, markets, events, helps recruit more and better prepared companies, I think is the main point for the next VTA. And this preparation phase generates results, however you want to define those results. And the evaluation of results leads to thinking about how to do better, basically, and that improvement makes its way into the planning and solution finding research. So all of these steps are taking place at once as collaboration brings new information and new perspectives into the loop. So again, here, this cycle is all about learning, evaluating and learning from previous experiences and applying that to future VTAs. So it's a more systematic approach to perhaps what has been happening in the past through face-to-face opportunities. And I think we are on one more slide here, best practices for companies. Well, the good news is that virtual trade activities are here to stay. As Doug mentioned, in the future, we believe we'll have more of a hybrid approach, some face-to-face, some virtual, but it will never go away. So here, why is that? I think we all know by now, it's less expensive. We don't have to get it on a plane to travel. So financially and in terms of time, it's simply less expensive. You can work from anywhere. It's a little bit more efficient depending on the actual activity or task that needs to be done. And also, there's an opportunity here to improve marketing and engage with your team with even more highly defined roles. And I think that Crystal's going to go a little bit more into that as well. These, for companies themselves also, as I mentioned, this VTAs expand now the market opportunities. There's global market access. They can be designed in such a way that they can engage more prospects. And later on, Doug's going to go through a sales funnel that can kind of show you that process. And it's easier now to measure success and to create the kind of metrics, both quantitatively and qualitatively, for you to figure out where you are in terms of meeting your goals as a company. So that's another good thing. The market has expanded. And the quality of the prospects can actually be improved using this digital technology. And you can also conduct, on that last point, just more targeted messaging using customized digital material, right? Everything from that very precise video I mentioned to landing pages to websites and social media, a full communications plan that can actually be applied to and bring to bear the kinds of more precise results that one is looking for. So next slide, please.
So thanks, Diane. We're going to now get into some of the challenges that companies have been experiencing in this transition over to virtual trade activities. So understandably, there have been challenges going from face-to-face to this two-dimensional reality that we're experiencing. And we received some feedback, for example, from the information and communications technologies sector that indicates that the technical features of their products are just so much better explained via a product demonstration than really they are over a screen. And some companies are actually reverting back to telephone calls because the Zoom fatigue has really worn them down, and the two-dimensional product demos are really not accomplishing the goal. And so while this has worked pretty well for some firms, you know, a larger firm who may be able to call on a client list, it's really a smaller SME is not going to have that same luxury. So here's where government representatives or delivery agencies can help companies of all sizes prepare their digital assets in order to make these virtual trade activities more comfortable. For example, as Diane had mentioned earlier, maybe for that ICT firm to start off the meeting with a high quality, like 2-minute video that explains the attributes of their product and the uses of their product, and maybe save some of the technical discussion for something later than they would have done in a face-to-face environment. And as well, infographics can be a good way to explain more complex issues by using kind of creative illustrations. So in the next few slides, we're going to take a look at some of the checklists that we've created. And we just have like a sample of the checklists in terms of how to get ready for a virtual trade mission, virtual trade shows, what are the new tools and technologies that virtual trade activities require, and some ways to support multilingual events. So beginning with the first checklist, it's going to be virtual trade missions. And as discussed earlier, these are events that government representatives and delivery agencies have control over. However, now is even more important that the companies themselves prepare for the missions in advance. It's even in the past, it's best when the companies have prepared themselves for the missions in advance, of course, but that value add where they're going to go and meet someone because of the networking opportunities, there's not going to be that coffee. So it's even more integral that the companies themselves have researched the markets, identified key players in the markets and events in those markets. And so they're ready to jump on board if a trade mission is announced. And of course, just as before, governments and associations can help companies, connect to those in-market partners and help gather this market intelligence, give profiles on agents or distributors or the news media they should follow or social media in market that they may not currently be involved with in Canada, so that they're really ready when the B2B starts. And I'm just going to highlight a few of the items on this checklist. As mentioned, the reasons why companies should be ready when the mission starts is because the timelines for virtual trade activities have shifted. If you, in the past, might have had a company who will be ready for those B2B meetings 5 weeks out because the mission is 5 weeks from now, that timeline has now been erased, because if there's an interest in the product, as soon as the matchmaker can make a meeting, the meeting may actually happen. So the company has to be ready when the mission starts, because meetings could happen during the event, but they could also happen before or after the event, days or weeks later. Some of the conferences, their platforms are open for a certain number of days after the event happens, which is great because you can get more value from that exhibition booth. Also, companies now have to be prepared to know that even if, let's say, the director of sales was the person who signed up for the event, when they have the meeting, they may be sitting in front of a CEO, CTO, CFO, or all three of those individuals. So companies have to be prepared to answer questions beyond what they think the person who's attending the event might be asking. And for this reason, one final point from this list I'd like to highlight: consider for a company to have someone else on the call who's off screen, whose sole job it is to gather information. If a question comes up that's best answered by the CTO, that person can either find the information or maybe reach out to the CTO to call that person into the call, and before that call is over, be able to answer that question, or at the very least, know that that's something that needs to be followed up with immediately after the call. So the next checklist is for virtual trade shows. And again, as mentioned before, in this kind of platform, you may be bringing a delegation, so you're not going to have control over what platform is being used. However, what you can do, you as an association or a member of government or the companies themselves can demo these platforms in advance. The platforms, you need to just maybe find out for the company what platform's being used. And these demos happen multiple times a day, every day. And that way, the attendee or that tech savvy member of the organization can participate in these demos and find out, okay, for the chat feature, can you download the chat after the event? Can you cut and paste it? Do I need to know how to take a screenshot of it, potentially? Or, you know, what kind of use can we make out of this chat? Are we going to maybe see who's asking questions in the question and answer to kind of let us know who might be a good person for us to meet? And if so, maybe make a meeting with them. The event itself may have a B2B component, but it's not necessarily the case on every platform that you're going to be able to request a B2B meeting during the event. It all might have to happen before the event. So if you know that in advance, you know, what kind of, let's say, conferencing, you know, Zoom or GoToMeeting, or what kind of web conferencing platform do you need to have, even if the event has B2B, and you need to be aware in advance, oh, I can't make the meetings from, you know, reaching out to someone in a chat, but I can do that if I have a separate web conferencing software available for me. And then from this list, I just want to highlight to ensure that, you know, all the sales materials in the booth is available in a digital format, and that the branding of it is also reflected on your company's website. The next list is virtual event technology assessment. So I'm going to pull out about 5 different things off of this list. Questions that you might be asking either in an RFP phase or just to get ready for an event. Does the platform enable your attendees at your booth to be able to download videos, folders, digital brochures? Are there file size limitations? How many documents can be on the event's platform? I believe someone else earlier had mentioned the fact that you can have these items also available on the company's website. Like I had said before, do you need an additional license for Microsoft Teams or Zoom or something like this if the platform doesn't have B2B? If the platform's using artificial intelligence to kind of make suggestions for B2B, has the company already thought of what are some choices for keywords that's going to allow those companies to be chosen? So have they really thought of, I guess, search engine optimization kind of issues that will help them with these B2B platforms? Does the event platform, when someone comes into a booth, do they just give you the name and the title of the person who's come into the booth, or are they giving you the whole profile of that person? If you know in advance that they're only giving you the name and the title, here's another reason to have that extra, you know, resource with you to be looking up that profile information when you're having the meeting. And if for some reason it's not serving you during the meeting because you can handle the meeting without knowing that kind of thing, at least you have that as well for the follow-up, and your follow-up can be more immediate. And then finally, consider having a custom landing page on the company's website that's linked to the profile on the event website. I think as Doug mentioned earlier, sometimes there's a charge per download of certain information, but if you can link to the company's website and have that information there, you can solve one of those problems. As well, often these events, you enter the event and that's when you can start looking at all these other attendees. But if in your social media publicity before the event, you are sending people to the landing page for the company's event, then the company can use that data on their own website. Who's come to my webpage? What kind of information? Have they pulled a technical document versus a marketing document? How long did they spend on my web page? So it's information in advance of the event, and it's, you know, the company themselves being able to get that data for their, you know, sales funnel later, even if they don't happen to meet that person at the event. Next page. Language support best practices. Okay, so I want to explain how simultaneous interpretation happens on these platforms. So it can happen seamlessly if the platform offers the feature, and not every feature will be available for every event. So a platform can have simultaneous interpretation in that event, but it's not chosen by the event organizer. And usually these are partnerships with language service providers. So you ask, if I'm having a multilingual event, am I forced to use a platform that offers simultaneous interpretation inside the platform? No, because there are other companies and they have what is called a helper app. And these helper apps plug into the back end of most, if not all platforms, the vast majority of platforms, and they put a widget on the front end, and effectively it's the same, what you see as a user is the same thing. You click on the button, you decide what language you want, you can toggle back and forth between the languages that you want. And with these helper apps, like I say, sometimes it's on the platform, sometimes you have to open a browser that is found behind the browser you're using to be on the video conference. And sometimes it is a phone app. And sometimes you have a choice between some of these things. So from this language support best practices checklist, I would say one thing to highlight, which is really important, is put extra time in your RFP phase to demo some of these technologies. Not only can you demo them, but for some of these platforms, be it multilingual or not, you can also have a trial period. So why not have some of your internal planning meetings to prepare the RFP be using some of these technologies? It vets the technology and it provides a training for the team that it may be using them for an event, because you know, all of these platforms and technologies, they have you know, a function where your user can go and ask for help. However, you also know they're also going to let you know if they can't make something function. So all the better, whether it's a multilingual platform or just doing a trial of the platform so everybody knows how to use it in advance. In any platform, always checking the cybersecurity credentials, asking about past data breaches, and making sure the companies have cybersecurity insurance. What we've heard in feedback from the research is that's not a question that's asked enough. Ask how many people are going to be supporting your event, how many project managers, tech support, and chat monitors. Remember, this is a service, so you should be having the service of that support. Once you have your collateral translated or dubbed or however you're going to use it for the event, consider having some backup content available for technology difficulties. If something happens, something is going to happen, maybe you're showing that backup video while you're fixing that technology problem, and maybe it's translated into different languages. This will also serve you because often in these kind of events, you'll see a document library or a resource library. So even if it isn't seen because there's no technical glitch, it can still be a resource in the document library from the event. And then finally, consider whether it makes sense or is feasible to have language-based breakout sessions. The next list is the digital assets checklist. And a lot of the information on this checklist, again, this is just a sample, is relative to the sizes and formats of different images or collateral. So I just want to pull two out today. One is having that 30-second to 2-minute promo video that we've discussed a few times now, and a longer video brochure or a video tour that will be used when people come to your booth, on your website, when you're making social media posts to talk about the issue of the day. It's just another touch point and a high quality touch point where people can get to learn about your company. And infographics, again, if you have complex issues that you want to explain in a creative way. Then the next, is it a checklist? Okay, so facing the future with virtual trade events. And these activities require us now to re-envision the selling process. So that's companies doing the research up front, learning new features of these event platforms. Like the chat can be very useful to me if I understand what's going to happen in it, or how can we post questions in the question and answer so other people want to talk to us, or how can we look at the question and answers to decide who's a good target for me. And maybe having new people in your organization, that tech savvy person who may not have anything to do with sales at the moment, who can help you figure out how these features of the virtual event can work for you. And in the process, that person gets a new opportunity within the company, gets trained in a sales kind of capacity. So it's a win-win situation. Re-engineering the timelines. That means more prep up front, whether it means for a delivery agency, more prep time in the RFP phase, or for companies preparing these digital assets. Eventually, that they won't have to have that much prep time anymore. People will get a feel for how these different platforms work, and prepare now, and it will become easier later, or at least more comfortable for companies. No sales time, no travel time now, so use it to, get your digital assets together. Rework the budget. Again, you're not traveling, you're not spending money on that, but invest in the technology. Realigning the workforce, more individuals from your organization prepared for these virtual trade activities. Consider, if it's the first one you're doing for a company, having your CTO, CEOs not take meetings at the same time so they can get pulled into a virtual trade meeting. Or consider having double the amount of people work the first event so you can figure out how to make better use of some of the features like chat or Q&A or what have you. Revitalize your sales materials, getting them ready for this digital environment, and reassessing payments, logistics, and customer service. So as an example of logistics, if you can't just make a 2-minute video about your food product. So at this time of COVID, how are you getting your samples there for the meeting, very quickly after the meeting, and have you figured out all of that in advance so you can effectively work in this virtual trade environment. So I think I'm going to now send it over to Doug, who's going to talk about the sales funnel and other activities more in detail.
Bristol, I appreciate that. And it's important when you create that sales material, and I'll mention this again, that it's consistent with the current brand of the company, and that they all flow together. We don't need to create something with a new image and it doesn't relate to the old documents. So in the virtual trade activity evaluation, we're looking at post-event evaluations, and because it's online, there's a lot of data that can be captured. If you're hosting the event, The data, you get to determine what data to share. You can see who's coming beforehand, afterwards, during, and where those move to a meeting and eventually a sale. So I think that tracking of data and understanding where they've moved along the chain, and I'll explain this a little bit more, gives you an opportunity to quantify that process for a company. Or when you go to another event that isn't being hosted locally, you need to check what data will be available for you for hosting that trade booth, and what will you be able to capture of movements around that, of what documents will be downloaded, and how you'll be able to quantify who's actually doing the download. And then does that result back out to a sales effort? So I think there's some really interesting things that can be done on the analytical side with that to make that just so much more important and valuable for the companies and for yourselves. I mean, when we're looking at the data metrics itself, we're looking at the analytics. Again, how long are they staying on the site? Have they signed up for a recontact? That's kind of a great way to box out, asking for a company who's shown up on your site to leave their contact information, or their email address. Kind of gives you allows you to build up your own internal database. So I think that's important to look at. And then we have this sales funnel. And it's been around for 100 years, and there's been different iterations, and there's a large body of study around these sales funnels, and they're used for a number of different aspects of selling and timing. We've kind of looked at it really as what is the collateral material or the steps that companies are using currently to close a sale. And so by looking at all the tools that they have at their disposal, the collateral material, developing templates that are ready for introduction, for follow-up, for a continuing discussion, letters to our company's samples and the prepackaged samples, all kind of help that firm move to a sale. But when do they deploy each of those aspects? And this, usually when you go to a conference, as we know, we go to the conference, we collect business cards, we write on the back of them, we have one-on-one meetings, and we write out notes, and then we come back to the office and we have all of that in a pile to do if we haven't done it on the plane. We're sitting there and then trying to catch up with the work we missed. And then we have to take another week to get all the follow-up from the conference. Well, there is no excuse not to do that as soon as you're off the call right now. It's a virtual world. You have all those tools at your disposal. You're at your office, you have your staff. If you don't have a staff, you have yourself, but everything's right there on your laptop in your office to support the next stage of that. So it all has to happen real time. And internally, if I'm the other person on the other end of the line, I expect that, right? Everything flows quite quickly if you're having that conversation. So we need to be fast on that. We need to train our companies to do that. And looking at the sales funnel, again, it's just looking at the predictability of the activities and the tools that are used to move people down to different stages to complete a sale. So if we can move on to the next slide. And I've just taken this broadly, and it can be used in any industry with multiple more levels or only 3 levels, but it kind of looks at what's the activity and what's the tool to support that activity. So if we look at the first one, and I have this in green, it's lead generation. And what are all the tools we use to create a lead? And it really, I give it a 0% weight because that's just the starting point of any discussion. It really doesn't have a lot of meat until we can move it forward. So we might attend a trade show to get that lead. We might ask for mentors, coaches to get the lead. We do a campaign, we do a news article. And then what do we have to support that once someone's been identified as a lead? We have brochures, presentations, websites, and introductory emails. And we might have some other thing, video clips and things. That's just support that lead. Then we go to prospecting on the next slide. And we look at that and we have follow-up from the leads, right? Now we've kind of moved them down. We've had a discussion, we've networked with them, we've tossed them aside, or we've moved them on to the next thing. And we're putting a little bit more time, a little bit more of our time and the company's money into this person, right? Or into this client. And so we have those activities. Again, we have brochures, sending templates, emails, phone calls to move it forward. So we're only in prospecting, but now we want to qualify this lead. We want to make sure this actually person that we've identified in the lead generation, we've prospected and we've had an initial discussion or some kind of interaction. Now we want to make sure they can actually do what they said they can do. And we might send pricing at this time. We might confirm the potential value in the sales and the timeline. We're really moving that on. And then we might be sending samples or a case study, price list. It's key for a company to understand when to do each action to move it along. So why would you send a price list when you don't even know if the person's qualified? You're wasting time and you're giving out information you don't need to. You get feasible. So you've sent them the pricing, they've given you some terms back. Now, is this feasible, right? Is this actually something we can do? Again, we're putting more effort into it. Now we've quoted out the work, and hey, we know at a success rate, every quote we send, and over time, they're hopefully building a database as they go through this on what percentage ends up moving forward to the next level. So now we've quoted a bid, and out of that quoting a bid, 65% of the times when we do that, we actually win business. When we're awarded the work, 90% of the time, we actually fulfill that. Why is that? Well, we even know through our own work, if we send out an RFP, we get a quote, we agree on a vendor, and then we have to negotiate those terms. And some people say, hey, I'm not going to do that. I'm out. So awarding doesn't lead to a sale. There's 90% chance it's going to be successful, but not always. Then we get the PO, and that usually works. But if the PO isn't set up right, we haven't done a proper credit check on the company, we might not get paid yet. Hopefully we've set up the payment terms and looked around that before we get to this stage to make sure we paid. We have insurance. And then closing the deal is actually closing with the client, making sure that's happened, and then starting the process again. So it's really just working with this sales funnel as almost a little SWOT, and it just gives us a way to understand that, but we can quantify it by success rate, and we can quantify it on a dollar basis of how much time and how much money we're putting into the client to end up in that whole process. So it's just a useful tool to look at it and understand how the business is moving. And it's also interesting to see where the gaps are in each of those phases as you talk with companies. What are you doing for lead generation? What are you doing for prospecting? What are you doing for qualification? And what resources they have and don't have? And then how we can develop future projects to support them across the board in various companies. Okay, I think it's off to Bruce.
Yeah. Really exciting part of this whole project is looking at how companies are using this new sources of information to be able to make those sales funnels more dynamic. Thanks on that, Doug. So just a short review. We're going to go to questions shortly, see if there are any questions in the queue. But so there's a number of checklists in there. We've been looking at checklists for companies primarily at this point, attending a trade show or a trade mission. There is one that we didn't deal with that is in the toolkit, and that really addresses the importance of having a really dynamic profile, both in a short form and a longer form. Just as those food company buyers are reviewing through ArangeMe a multitude of suppliers at the same time, looking at them in the same format and trying to zero in on which ones are most attractive to them. People are doing that in trade shows and trade events as well. And so you need that profile that really pops in like a digital elevator pitch. And so there's a section in there on that. And when people get the full document, they'll be able to have a look at that. The checklists that we've shown are elements of the checklist with a screen capture put into a PowerPoint slide. So there are, in most cases, there are many more items on the checklist than we were able to see today. And even then, we're only addressing some of the ones that we're seeing. But so the checklist will be more comprehensive. And we're going to have a look later on in some detail at evaluating a virtual trade activity, everything that's involved in that. We're going to be looking at how platform features, which ones are most suitable for which types of virtual trade event that's coming up. And also having a look at some of the platforms that you've already been using and seeing how they stack up according to other platforms according to the features that platform has. All of this, of course, is winding its way towards a kind of major worksheet that is a planning tool that will look at the activities that the delivery agency or government agency has got to do in order to make a virtual event happen, and what the companies have to do, and having a sense of the relative timelines for each of those. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on that as we come to that. At this point, I guess Jessica will ask, are there any questions that need to be dealt with right now?
No, not at this point. We're I think everyone is just absorbing everything.
Okay, so we'll just pop on then to have a look at some best practices on the virtual trade activity for governments. There's some really good news here. I think although we've identified there's issues around technology that have to be dealt with, and companies are going to have to deal with them, and government heads of delegation are going to have to deal with them as well, so that they're able to plan around them. As has been noted, not every platform has every feature. And so if you have to supplement that with something, what will it be? Just in terms of replacing your everyday communication with people in your delegation. You used to be able to talk to them face to face and say, how's it going? You know, what are you using? Is it WhatsApp? Are you using Slack? What are you using to be able to check up on how people are doing? So there are some short-term issues, but once people have mastered them, it'll become routine, and we'll be able to have a look over the horizon and see what's coming next. But for sure, these short-term issues will change how we do business in the long term. Because virtual trade is here to stay. In terms of issues outside of our control, really, we're looking at the big reset on the economy. I think a lot of companies were shocked at how much of their supply chain got battered during the COVID crisis, and people had too many eggs in one basket, and or have a supplier halfway around the world, and they have an issue with production or transportation or something, and it's affecting a company's ability to assemble products here in their own factories. And so our companies will be dealing with that. And you're hearing a lot more talk about like bilateral trade agreements with the UK and US and UK and Canada now developing these trade agreements. A lot more people talking about target trade. You hear about Buy American, and Ontario is saying, you know, coming out of this pandemic, boy, we're going to be buying more from Ontario. So the opportunities to engage in targeted trade will be there, perhaps where it's one trade delegation to another. It will become something that we're seeing more of. So basically, all of our government partners, our companies, our associations are responding to changes that the companies are facing, and so they're adjusting some of the services that they offer and some of the ways they look at things. And of course, suppliers, consultants, and others are trying to get out ahead of the process in order to be able to add value. But with these new roles, there's going to be new relationships built, and you know, a case in point might be the key role that Trade Commissioner Services might play now, or are playing now, when you can send them digital material and they can just share that material with whoever on their contact list they want to, so that they're able to ration out or the right messages for the right audience. But we're able to use much more fully the breadth and depth of relationships that the trade commissioners have now by feeding them this new digital materials that they can get out to people in their geographic marketplaces, or if they're responsible for a particular sector, you know, within that sector. So as people are taking on these new roles, there will be new relationships, new ways to collaborate that are coming together. And I just want to highlight, in doing our interviews, we talked with one person who was leading a delegation to a trade show. And this was a first time virtual event for that trade show. They'd always been face-to-face. And so, you know, the delegation head was having some concerns about, are they going to be able to deliver enough prospects to be able to satisfy my companies? And so she was able to reach out to another person in the same situation with her, a European country that was bringing a major delegation, and say, well, why don't we create an interaction between our two delegations and see what can be done. And so there are new ways to graft activities onto existing events, or whole new initiatives that could happen. We might see more cluster to cluster activities where the you know, the food valley in Holland is interacting with the Atlantic Canada food cluster. Or where you have industry showcases where, you know, the Oceans Technology Group reaches out to particular kinds of people they want to talk to about subjects that they want to talk to them about. So we're able to create some of these things that set up these new opportunities. And this is all coming as a result of these evolving relationships. So we did put together some recommendations, and we're going to go through two of them now. And really, they're not rocket science. There are things that people have been working on to a large extent anyways, but there's really an opportunity to formalize the timelines for virtual trade activities, so that if you have a trade mission and you're going to a new market, you could expect that it would take X amount of time because you've listed each of the activities that are involved in that and scoped out how much time it's going to take for each of those. And so we're looking at formalizing that the timelines for virtual trade activities. This will mean earlier RFPs for consultants who might be doing B2B or training with the participants, and redefining some of those deliverables and measurables. But those are things that can be conceived of ahead of time and inserted into the RFP. And you're saying, okay, well, we're going to allow X amount of time for that, and we'll be able to build a program from there. Looking at, there's already been experimentation with programs that are helping companies localize their websites, for example, as in New Brunswick, or one of the oceanographic shows, Oceanology. I think people were getting video work prepared in Prince Edward Island with the lead on the bio show. There were video work being done. So either there's a standing program where companies can access this as they identify a gap in their arsenal of digital materials, or there's an additional RFP that relates to a particular project that says, okay, everyone who's going to this event can access these services under this RFP. So those things would be knit into that process. And another opportunity, really, two things. One on having a technology person play a role within, a support role within the trade team. This, again, doesn't have to be forever, but in the short term, making sure that all of the delegation leads and people on the government side are up to speed on how the trade platforms work, and also making sure that the companies are up to speed on that. A little bit of work now can make it more comfortable for everyone involved, and this time next year they won't need that same amount of help if everything goes right. Likewise, on the communication side, I think some people have embraced social media and they've got it down pat and they're using it fully, and others aren't. And so there's an opportunity to have someone who's dedicated role in this project is the communication side of using the social media, not only on behalf of the delegation as a whole and the destination, Atlantic Canada, but also helping individual companies, that dual role there. And lastly, we've noticed that the lines are really getting blurred between what's trade and what's investment attraction when you start talking about startups and strategic partnerships and whatnot. So it's a really good time to make sure that the channels are open between our trade people and our investment attraction people, so that when we have a major project on the go, we're able to be firing on all cylinders and making sure we're getting the optimum benefits that are there to be gotten from these events. The second recommendation at this stage is really capitalizing on the opportunity to get everyone to recognize the need to improve marketing effectiveness. And I want to really single out here not only the government folks for programs that will help companies with their digital materials and whatnot, but also association people and the role that they can play in helping the industry define what is an enhanced digital standard, and how can we promote that and get companies to accept that. If you have a delegation of 30 companies going somewhere and 2 or 3 of those companies haven't embraced a quality standard for digital material, if somebody, here we're out there saying, when you see an Atlantic Canada delegation, you're seeing smart, leading edge companies who are firmly focused on the future and have the technology to get us there. And then they stumble onto the 1 or 2 companies that haven't really embraced this, and their branding isn't consistent, or they don't have, they don't display the tools that that we expected everyone would. So it's important that as a delegation, we're as strong as our weakest link, and so we really need to get those people engaged. So a big part of this, getting the buy-in and the commitment, is that there should be some self-assessment there, where companies can have a look at things and say, boy, these are the things that I really need to work on, and look at this. Here's a training program, or here's a program that will allow me to get the help I need to enhance these standards. And if we could just imagine that companies would pre-qualify or pre-certify as virtual trade ready, so that all of that is out of the way. Now when we call and say, we're gathering a delegation for a particular trade show or a trade mission, any of those companies coming to the table, we know they already have their digital media packages together, and we know that they've schooled themselves on how to work best in a digital environment, virtual environment. And it'll be a lot easier to and smoother to do that recruitment. And if anything is clear now, the third aspect of this is that every company needs to be to have the access to high-speed internet. And so thankfully there's a renewed commitment to enhancing the infrastructure in rural areas of Atlantic Canada relative to the internet. And all of us should really be supporting that as proactively as we can. So in terms of event readiness, there's a few major elements that really are going to be addressed in detail now. One, the RFP process, what can be done to streamline that and to make that as effective as possible. Two, really looking at what could we do in advance so that when we start the recruitment process, companies can immediately recognize whether or not this is a good event for them. And so we're going to drill down on that. And again, these things are reflected in the checklist that we will be providing later on. And thirdly, what about research? How is the need for research changed with virtual trade activity? Certainly heading into a trade show where you don't know in advance who the attendees are, you know there's going to be 10,000 of them. What can be done to prepare to meet with those companies and to find the people you'd like to talk to? So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about prospect research and the role that it can play. So this will be Diane now.
Great, thank you, Bruce. So as the previous slide indicated, we can think about VTA readiness in three areas of the RFP process, recruiting, and in research. So on the RFP process, Bruce had mentioned quite a bit already, so I don't want to duplicate, but I can reinforce some key points there. And one of the big points here is that mostly successful programs, well, first of all, you have to decide, do you want to issue an RFP or not? Do you need to build partnerships in order to deliver an efficient and effective VTA for your companies? If that's a yes, then you really have to be thinking from the very beginning holistically and think about how much time and plan for ample time in that beginning phase, that preparation phase, to evaluate the technology and to provide training for all the stakeholders, your colleagues in the delivery agency, the government agency itself, the participating companies, and even partners who are not necessarily the technology provider, but others. So that onboarding process for participants encourages practice time and simulated selling activities, with all activities reflected in the budget itself. So upfront, as part of the preparation, that technology piece and training is very important. And when you're announcing a trade mission or a virtual conference, for example, At that first organization meeting, often we understand it's an informational session promoting the event itself and answering any questions participants may have. Try to have a live demo of the technology platform there so that prospective participants can actually look at the features and see if it's something of value to them, and what are the minimum technology requirements then to actually participate, your delegation to participate in the VTA itself, and how can they maximize the use of that technology platform. So building that live demo up in the preparation RFP stage would be very important. In addition, you want to look at what are the needs of your companies to upgrade their technology and digital assets. Do they need to upgrade their own website? Do they need to produce a video that pitches their new disruptive technology or food products in a way that really simulate, as Doug was mentioning, previous face-to-face missions where looking and feeling and tasting is important? What kind of, therefore, digital assets need to be upgraded for the company? And then also, can those needs be addressed internally by your marketing department, or do you need to issue an external, issue that need as part of the RFP process? Do you need to partner with a third-party private sector vendor? And that's something that will be a prerequisite for a company's participation in a virtual export event to be able to upgrade their technology and their digital assets to be able to participate optimally. You might also consider, again, as part of your needs and therefore addressed either internally or through the RFP, for an event website with custom landing pages. Crystal, you and Bruce both may have mentioned this in the past, for each participant profile. And when this is done, it's a more effective selling tool, as also Doug mentioned, and you can start to track via analytics responses to those pages by prospective customers, partners, and so forth. And so address that in the RFP as well. If this website doesn't exist, how can you actually establish a website with these very customized landing pages? Also want to pay attention to information that's gathered on the delegate in advance during the registration and profiling process. Paying attention to that process and capturing even more details so that better B2B matches can be made. Now with the digital technology, I think you can create surveys and profiles in a way that captures the kinds of questions and answers that prospective customers will want to know. And granted, this has been done in the past with the face-to-face missions, and we've run a number of different trade missions. First step there is to create a corporate profile form and conduct an interview with the company and be able to identify distinguishing advantages, core technologies, previous experience in the market, all of those things. But with the digital process now, you can delve more deeply into that profile development through an online registration system, and then be able to take that knowledge, that data, and make better matches. So how to be pretty ambitious in that process, and how to address the need via internally or the RFP itself, partnering with a third-party organization. And then finally, I would have to say too, with the RFP, definitely you want to be looking at a risk management assessment. You want to be able to identify how you're going to avoid any failures in terms of technology or human failures using the technology. And so how to address those could include providing some coaching on how to use the technology, again, built into the RFP, practice preparation, check your quality of the technology connections, working within international time zones, mapping that out, And so also looking at the technology platform that you're using for the VTA, whether you are designing it or there's another host organization that is using a different technology platform. What are the security requirements? Any security failures in the past? Be aware of those and have a plan in place to address them. Then the second part of the VTA readiness, so we started with the RFP process, we're going to go now into recruiting. This recruiting really, the recruiting timeline really depends on a few aspects. Bruce had mentioned research before also. So the research can start with actually researching the industries and the geographic markets for trends, opportunities, maybe conduct a SWOT, to then be able to pinpoint even more clearly where the opportunities lie for your firms. And actually using digital technologies for that research can actually uncover even more valuable insights that you can then match with your companies when you recruit. In addition to the industry and geographic market research, also just researching prospects. So a sample of prospects in advance, potential prospects for your companies to consider may be a way to entice the firms to consider participating in your virtual trade activity. So conducting that kind of research, first of all, is highly important, again, early on to ready the companies so that they are able to really maximize their experience. And secondly, I think I mentioned earlier, event intelligence, understanding how much assistance is coming from the event organizer and what technology they're using, what is the business proposition for companies to participate in one event versus another event. So really the distinguishing advantages of different types of events will have to bubble up to the top and be used then when you recruit. And some of this stuff, again, is not different from what you've engaged in for your face-to-face events, but the difference is that you have now the digital technology overlaid here, which gives you access to even more intelligence on events themselves. And again, part of the recruiting is training for the companies themselves. Who's going to provide that? Governments, consultants, and those training requirements during preparation and readiness really depend on the level of complexity of either the industry, the market itself, and the nature of the buying process. So for example, if you're looking at Boeing, you're a aerospace small firm wanting to understand Boeing's procurement process, that is one type of training that could be segmented out and customized for firms in aerospace and who do not yet have that experience selling to large buyers, or it might be the military, much different set of rules depending on military versus commercial aerospace. The level of complexity is very important. Also training, again, in terms of technology platforms. How much experience, to Bruce's point earlier, some people are very experienced with technology platforms or VTAs, others no experience whatsoever. So you'll have to determine the training needs for companies in that particular area as well, plus cultural issues, the range. And then another, on the recruiting side, just market readiness. Companies could be doing a self-assessment to figure out, are they new to the market? Are they wanting to expand an existing overseas market? And what types of programs do you have currently on offer to support firms to become market ready? And if you don't have the in-house support programs, how will you partner with third-party organizations to offer them? And then another point regarding recruiting is cost sharing. And this is a real we learned through the interviews and even our own experience, it's a challenge, isn't it, to figure out, for example, how much should you charge a company to participate in a trade show or a virtual trade mission? And do they, number one, firms pay that amount? Number two, do they take the responsibility to prepare themselves in partnership with government for that event? And number three, do they see that value that is offered by the government in terms of when they're leading these programs? And there's sort of a mixed bag in terms of the feedback that we received. A couple of interviewees, though, made some interesting comments regarding how they were able to create value for participants, getting them to pay the $500 to attend such and such an event, but seeing that actually the value that they're gaining for that $500 is much higher, $5,000 to $10,000, right? So how to create that value, you may include, for example, the company pays $500, but what they get from that is not only participation in the event, but up to 10 hours of consulting services to help prepare front end, the technology, your video, your digital assets, and so forth. So you get that extra value while still, as a company, while still though taking the responsibility, and that, you know, that $500 is a way to sort of weed out those that are serious from those that are not. At the same time, though, we've seen an increase in the number of firms being able now to participate in VTAs because the registration fees have come down and the cost of some of these shows have decreased as well. So wrestling with this, this challenge of demonstrating where the value is during the recruitment process can be done and done well. And we have some examples, and the checklists also will reflect that process as well. Finally, just remembering, and Bruce had mentioned this, I'm going to reiterate, on communications and the recruitment, you have an opportunity now, again, to take a much more holistic approach and include, when you're trying to recruit companies, certainly many of you know your own firm, so you'll pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, we're going to Bio, or we're going to this event, let's start working. You may, though, also miss out on some new firms that have established themselves, or other companies that maybe in the past hadn't participated but now are ready to. So how do you reach those short of making phone calls? And the next step would be sending emails out on a regular basis to promote the event. But I would also say now's the time to really integrate those social media tools, the range, right? LinkedIn, Facebook, using communications tools like Slack and others where you can quickly communicate. Researching and integrating those tools into a much more comprehensive communication strategy upfront during recruitment. That'll set you up actually for the rest of the process of the implementing as well, the VTA and providing follow-up. Next slide. Oh, I should also say that communications will also enable you to track some analytics measures that you can then respond to and tweak on that continuous basis when you're thinking about that planning cycle. Then finally, the third element of readying firms for VTAs, research. Again, we're going to emphasize the fact that one should research ahead of time industries and sectors and make this sort of on an ongoing basis, maybe every 3 to 6 months. You go back to the industry, back to the market to really understand what has changed, what are the opportunities and challenges there. And this is best approached in collaboration with partners. And also it gives you the ability to create a library of resources that are made available online on a continuous basis. So sector research, very important. Also the event research that I mentioned analyzes the activity based on commitments and deliverables outlined by the organizers. You can add in participant feedback from previous events into that event research, and also the likelihood of the event delivering actual qualified business prospects. So researching the event itself, very important. And then the prospect research I had mentioned. Now you can dig even deeper to gather strategic information on prospects, on their products and services, the size of the company, which division, which executives, what markets are they active in, what are their growth markets, what is the competitive position and values and reputation in the industry of prospects. And so all of that would be part of the sales funnel that Doug was also looking at. And any other information that would help a supplier understand why they would choose to buy their product. And that again is this whole distinguishing advantage focus. But the point here is that companies during this readiness preparation stage in partnership with government should be able to research the sector, the event, and the prospect for business sales at the end of a normal cycle related to that particular virtual trade activity. And those digital tools available now are much more robust and enable a participant to be able to customize messages to prospects, follow up in a much more systematic way and qualified way, so that now is the time to, from a government perspective and delivery agency perspective of these VTAs, to look at this process in a much more holistic way, starting with that readiness phase and then continuing that process through the entire planning cycle, so that there's this feedback loop that is incredibly important, I would argue. So Bruce?
Opportune to be talking about feedback loops and the planning cycle, because, as we looked earlier, there's, there are a number of steps here that get repeated for each event. So if you have a couple of different events happening, and also there are things that you're doing or that some of your contractors are doing, and as well as things that companies are doing, and they're all happening simultaneously. And as nice and parallel as the circles are, in real life, of course, sometimes the circle seems to be going backwards, but in any case, you're taking every opportunity to gather information that will help improve the process. And so we have research ahead of the recruitment to be able to make it clear to companies that this is a great event for them. And then we have more research after the recruitment, where we're really looking at the prospect type information. And just to acknowledge that we know that you have a lot of other things going on in your jobs besides planning these particular events. And so there could be at any one of these stages some issues that have to be dealt with in terms of funding approvals or policy initiatives or participation of VIPs or other kinds of things. And so it's perfectly feasible to have additional cycles of evaluation and whatnot happening at the same time. But suffice to say, the issue is to really communicate well with the participants and other team members, and build on that collaboration. In terms of building on the collaboration, what we tried to do with this chart here is really show what kinds of activity are being undertaken at any given time by government or delivery agencies, and what kinds of things are being taken up by companies. And so when people get the actual toolkit, this item will be available in an Excel format, so it'll be readable for one. I just wanted to let you have a sense of this now. We have number of weeks before the event. And so we have the duration of a particular activity, for example, that has to do with recruiting here or has to do with event planning here. And up at the front end are all these things that we termed everyday business. So we're going to go through some of those, and you can just imagine them in their taking their place on this chart. But here they are in a readable format. And essentially what we're trying to do with having a look at this everyday business is to make the accumulation of marketing information and market intelligence a routine thing that happens all the time. So whenever you see an article that is a critique on a new trade show, or when you see something that relates to a boom in shipbuilding in the Indian marketplace, then you'll know what to do with that information to sort of stash it and store it, to either drill down on it later on or whenever you have a moment to do that. And these would be things like, what are the plans for your particular agency? What are your objectives that you're trying to get at this year? Looking at opportunity identification by looking at trade data, researching sectors and subsectors, looking at end user customers, the academic community, the military, government purchases, construction companies, major projects. You can imagine how well researched things like the shipbuilding project here, or the Lower Churchill Falls and hydro project and the undersea component. Companies would be looking at these major construction projects and trying to find a role for themselves. So companies will be doing it too, but certainly if you're in charge of the power gen sector, that would be something that you'd be paying attention to. Just notionally getting a sense of what markets are booming. Hey, it would be interesting to do a trade mission to such and such a place now because of this increased activity. And therefore you're making notations and gathering that info for later on, evaluating other events, brainstorming new events, trade agreements, researching them and what opportunities might be coming from trade agreements, communicating with companies and industry associations, looking for that feedback on what are the leading edge companies saying about markets that they really like to get into. It could be that they're considering something that you hadn't really thought of, or it's a chance to bounce a market that you've been thinking off those companies. So having a kind of repository for some of this information certainly would help, but it's creating a mindset where we're gathering this kind of info throughout and through our allies in other levels of government and people in market who have a handle on what's going on there. And this will give an opportunity for you as well to develop some templates on timelines, budgets, evaluations, resources, et cetera, so that when the time comes, you can deploy those effortlessly. So companies, they're in bigger picture mode here. They're looking at what they're trying to do for the year and responding to things. They've got maybe pet projects on the go with, upgrading their website or digital technology. And they're doing training to get ready for the next big event. We talked a lot about recruitment, but just imagine sitting down for the first time with people and having an overview of what's going on in a particular marketplace in a particular sector and who the movers and shakers are and how is the collaboration between academic institutions and government institutions and the business happening in that area. you know, something like when people are looking in on this marketplace and seeing what's going on with Cove and all the various players who are pulling together there in Newfoundland and in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island that are all ocean related. So when you sit down with these companies and you're saying, this is the opportunity, here's some research that we've managed to dig out so far on that. You know, you might want to have a look at this checklist to see if you're ready to participate in that and identify any gaps or training. Here's some things that we've identified that there'll be training offered on. And we're thinking about this particular time frame, so it would follow this trade show, but be before that one. And maybe you have a contract there that says, okay, we're recruiting companies, but if you're coming to this, it's full tilt and you have to agree to, and whatever commitments you want to get from the companies, you get them then. Coming to a recruitment session with that kind of information base would really allow companies to decide pretty quickly whether this is for them or not. Then on the event planning side, you know, there's a lot of those decisions that you know, that come from looking at the shows and conferences, what they're offering and what the you know, the cost benefit is to those events. Looking at what, do I have the timeline? Do I have the ramp up time to be able to do that event, or are they pitching it just too late for us to really respond? Looking at the technology that's needed, looking at, you know, I think on the service provider side, we are, I mean, I'm speaking as a consultant here, but also best advice is, you know, identify somebody who works well with your sector or works well with your, the customers that you're trying to lead on these events, and build those relationships early, and let them get involved so that they can offer their best advice and their best work in a time so that you can take a benefit from that. If they come in too late, if you pigeonhole someone just as, oh well, they're a matchmaker, you know, then you're bringing them in, you know, in a short time frame, and they don't really have a chance to contribute their best work, and it all could have been done a lot easier. Evaluation work plans, yes. If anything is true, evaluation has got to be part of the way we do business in the go forward, and it's got to go well beyond, you know, how did you do and how much business do you think you're going to get over the next couple of years. It has to measure more tangible nitty-gritty things, the metrics about performance and the impact of various things that we do, like communications pieces and event hosting and other things like that. So lots of things to be done on the event planning side. Now that we're into implementation, you know, you've got your crew working. The companies are working. The contractors are doing their thing. The trade show is doing their thing, and things are falling into place. But the companies are really starting to amp up their activity now, and so we're seeing them staffing up and getting their people ready for a show that has got 10,000 attendees, and they could get swamped right away. How are they going to be dealing with that? So all of these things we've addressed with checklists to try and get companies prepared for that. But suffice to say, they will be picking up steam as they get closer to the event and getting ready to engage. So this is the second half of that work plan. The first half had things that were being done by government. All of these green things are things that are being done by companies. And actually, when you see the website, it's done in a way that makes it easier to understand what people are doing simultaneously. But it will give you a chance to fill in the actual dates for an event. So not only do you know that here it's, 20 weeks before the event, but in fact, we know what that date is and what week that is, so that whatever activity is being done by the company or whatever activity is being done by the government is happening during that week. And of course, you could have a couple of these work plans happening for different events at the same time. Recommendation number 3, and this is something where we're really looking at how well equipped are companies now to deal with a dramatic ramp up in use of digital technologies, and how well equipped are we as a delegation going to a particular trade show to plug into the trade show site and perhaps have supplementary activities, as we talked about, where you have bilateral discussions with another government delegation, or you have a pre-event conversation happening where maybe, as somebody who's been to this particular conference for the last 10 years in a row, you've thrown it open and said, hey, we'd like to talk to any new people who are attending from anywhere in the world, because we have companies here who have been for many times, and they can, they'd like to help you out and get ready for this thing. Again, these are small items, but they're issues that could entice an attendee to declare early on, hey, I'd like to talk to you about that. And you get talking, and then you get to be positioned as knowledgeable people in this particular area. And before long, either you're evaluating those attendees as potential prospects, or they're suggesting, oh, I know someone who really needs what you're trying to sell here. And so you have an ally out there. And so we call this building community, and it can happen before the event, during the event, after the event. But in many cases, it needs a platform to be able to happen on. And so while we could do this with a Facebook groups site, or we could do this with a dedicated Slack channel for this particular event where you open it up and bring other people in, or it could be done with a LinkedIn group where you're admitting people that are synergistic with your interests. It could also be done with a website or portal that caters to that particular industry sector. And so in addition to linking to the virtual trade event site, it can be used for these pre and post events. It can help support your cluster of companies in that industry sector to profile themselves and gain that synergy from being part of 20 really smart companies that are presenting new products in a particular area. And it can be there to enable delivery of new virtual trade activities like the cluster to cluster event, or a TED type talk, or an open house at in a particular institution. And all of these things will attract your target customers, your company's target customers, into a discussion environment. And also, if we look at this, already now, some of, like this PowerPoint, for example, it's too big to be able to email to people. So in order to distribute it, we would have to post it to a OneDrive or a site like that, where Lockbox or something, where it could be downloaded. And so when you start having a number of different videos on a particular company, and a number of different maybe high density files that relate to a 3D imagery, or as you know, Diana mentioned earlier about people selling to the building community, and they're downloading very intense architectural files. Some of these companies may need some help in distributing this kind of material. And so this is a whole new area of, they're calling it sales enablement, where the marketing people are trying to make sure that the salespeople have the right, most up-to-date material that can be customized for each customer and accessed from anywhere in the world, and therefore measured. And they're finding that if there's any bottlenecks with distribution, then the best material is not necessarily getting out to those prospects. So marketing is creating stuff that sales is not using, which is in no way cost effective. So in our little world here, then having a platform that helps individual companies to store digital material and distribute that material, and while at the same time allows for companies to get together in a secure environment and talk about preparations for a show or evaluations of a particular activity or sharing of research or other kinds of things, because there can be, you know, password protected areas or different rights that would be given to our companies versus customer companies. The ability to have multiple landing pages so that we know exactly where somebody came from, and they're being fed exactly the right piece of information that we want to feed someone who's coming from that particular query, so that if we run into them at a trade show that and we're there promoting one of our technologies, that's the one they meet when they come. And as I said, I think earlier, lots of times these companies are, you know, they have their own websites, but they're talking to local customers or domestic customers, as well as export customers. And, you know, you might land on a small company's site and you'd be asking yourself, am I on the right place? These people seem to be talking retail here. So this allows people to have a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week export facing website that is a congenial environment that creates synergy around their particular sector. And so that's what we're imagining as a virtual trade community with supporting technology for that. And it's time that we kind of engage seriously in that discussion about how to deliver that, because we're very close to the point where many companies are going to be needing that in order to succeed with virtual trade activity. So that's recommendation number 3. And you know, a number of these points we covered there. Obviously, the social media side, we had engaged a person on the trade team to really help companies deliver their message and also get a collective message out about the delegation or the destination. That you know, we want to package these in a way that can easily be shared by in-market partners. We want to be able to host these pre and post-event initiatives, building community with our target audience. There needs to be communications technology to emulate the face-to-face that you would ordinarily get with your own delegation at a trade event. And so things like Slack and WhatsApp are pretty good for that kind of thing. And of course, we talked about the community web presence. And the big thing there that it lasts between events. The event might only be 4 days for a particular trade show, but this site, all of those materials can be repurposed and put on the community site that is there between events. And so it never stops working. And you're really getting that, that synergy from that. So lastly, evaluation, just to make sure that this message is clear, that you now have the opportunity to get information from companies, both their verbal feedback on what happened during the event and how they liked it and what worked and what didn't work and whatnot, but also get quantitative information about how many people came by the booth or how many meetings they had. You can get that same kind of event data from the event organizer saying there were 7,000 people that attended this event, and 4,000 identified themselves as buyers, and this is the job title of most of these people, and there were so many B2B meetings held, and they will be anxious to publish a lot of this material because this attests to the fact that this show is a good show for someone in this sector. And so it's important to capture that data so that you're able to cross-reference it with your own data. The web analytics that comes from whatever the show organizer provides about downloads of material on your delegation site, and whatever you can get from the companies themselves about what kind of customer they had visit their sites, how long they stayed there, what kinds of things they looked at, whether they moved themselves along the sales funnel by virtue of the questions they asked or the things they signed up for. And then also you can go to suppliers who are like the B2B consultants or other kinds of people who are working on the project and saying, tell us what data you've collected. And typically you have there are X number of meetings, and so many took place beforehand and so many took place afterwards. And then any surveys that are done either by the event themselves or by your team as to either surveys to attendees at large or just to your delegation. All of that information gets dragged in, and that's a lot of stuff to be considered. And the question is to what end? And the end is trying to make sure that we're at the right event, that we have the right marketing plans in place to be able to capitalize on the opportunity. We're measuring our performance there, and the whole objective is to be able to identify best practices and evolve them into the future so that we're getting continuous improvement as we do these events. And all of this builds momentum for the next initiative. If we've had trouble recruiting for one show and people come back and say, here's what happened, and you're able to show chapter and verse what happened during that show, there'll be enormous amounts of momentum next time. People will be saying, make sure I'm signed up for that next year. I want to be there. And so this is not a bad thing for people to sometimes miss out on an opportunity and realize that if they had been on the ball, they could have participated in something that the best of the companies did participate in and got great results from. So you'll have lots of ammunition for the recruitment on the next go round. So okay. We have about a minute or so to go through these next, the review of the toolkits here. So we've hit really all of these at this point. Once again, they are bigger and bolder in real life than they are in the PowerPoint presentation, and they're more usable. One that we'd like to have a look at is the assessing a virtual event. And we really feel that when you're first looking at something for a first-time participation, or even if they've made the jump to virtual and you want to do a reassessment on something that you've been to in the past and face-to-face, there's business issues, there's technology issues, there's logistics issues, and there's branding issues that should be addressed. And primarily amongst the business issues, the main question is, are we going to get sufficient prospects to satisfy companies in our delegation? And what is the event organizer going to do for us to get those prospects in front of our company? What's their track record on delivering these prospects? Have I been able to get a guarantee from them that if we register, every one of our companies will get X number of prospects, you know? So it all revolves around the business opportunities for the companies. And the more assurances we can get, the better it is. Is this the right timing from a selling perspective, or is it just out of season with when those kinds of purchase decisions are being made? Is their technology workable, or is it problematic? You know, if it's a difficult platform to work with, then we know we're going to need more training. And if my delegation already knows how to use it, that might be a plus because it's been used for several other shows and it'll be easier to do that. And always, of course, is there a better event to reach this target customer? So we'd want to ask ourselves those things. We're really looking at you know, recognizing that the technology changes over time, and even though it might not have worked that well last time, if they put in improvements for this event, it's quite likely that it could work great this time. And having realistic expectations, knowing that everything can't be done by one technology, and just again, when we're interviewing some of the consultant people who have been working with Atlantic Canada on projects, you know, and you hear them say, hey, I've been working with this particular tech platform and my people know it better than the people at the company. That's a really good sign. You have confidence then that they're not beholden to someone else to be able to figure out how to use it. And you got yourself a really good partner there. So that's not to be underestimated. Having a platform that you know well, even if it doesn't do everything you want, is sometimes better than having a platform that you don't necessarily know what it does, or you don't have people who know how to use it. So I think the cost issue is something here that really needs to be recognized as well. Are there going to be a lot of incremental costs every time you post a document, every time somebody downloads it? You know, those are concerns. And if you can't really make meetings during the event, then you know, you're dependent only on what you've been able to arrange before the event. And if there isn't a lot of information available about who's attending that event, then it's going to be kind of hard. So increasingly, it's almost a game. It's almost a necessity to be able to either arrange things, B2B meetings during the event, or at least have a comfortable way to use your own platforms like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever in parallel with these things. So having a good look at technology. Logistically, is there adequate time? Are my companies ready already for this event, or is there a lot of prep going to be required? Do we have significant resources to do a good job on this? Do we need to upgrade our website hosting or our own technology to be able to cope with the increased activity? Is it secure technology? Is it a closed event, or are we going to find people who are wandering in who aren't really prospects and are just going to be wasting people's time or spying on their information? And really having a good think about protection of companies' IP. You know, there's real danger when you, and that's why Doug's cautionary notes about think about what point in the process you want to start really telling them what's inside the cookie jar. It's important that you look after your IP and that's a hat that government people can wear, is keeping an eye out for what's best for their companies as well. One person had even suggested, gee, we really need to look at where these servers are hosted, because in some jurisdictions you can, foreign governments can have access to any data that is there. And so we'd want to be sure that that wasn't going to negatively affect our companies. From a branding perspective, it is a high profile event that we just really should be at. Is it the kind of event that's going to attract top-notch leaders in business and industry? Our partners at federal and provincial, are they participating? And is there a way we can work together to create more synergy or do joint promotion? Can companies meet the quality of in-market partners and partners for sales and distribution that they're looking for? I know they're always looking for customers, but it could be that this is a great event to talk to channel partners with. Will the digital media from this event be repurposed and remain online for a long time? If that's the case, then we're going to see some of our company videos showing up on the event website for months in the future, and that's always a good thing. Are there ways that, are they open to having you add profile for our companies and our clusters and attract more attention? Is there some way that we can sponsor something, get preferred access, get better data, make sure that when videos of this event get repositioned and posted between events, that some of our companies are there? Can we be tagged in some of their advertising that says, wow, this event is so good that Atlantic Canada is attending? These are all things that we could look at from a branding perspective. And just on the brand, it used to be quite straightforward and recognize that, the Canada brand is a really valuable element in the international marketplace. And so in a trade show, there was a lot of time and energy went into positioning the Canada brand because of all the goodness that flows down to the company's credibility, et cetera. So how has that changed in this virtual environment, and what can we do to emphasize that Canada brand, that Atlantic Canada brand, or provincial brand, whatever the nature of the show is, that will benefit the delegation? And is this something that we can build an advertising program around? We shouldn't abandon traditional advertising if there are people still reading publications, either online or in print, or advertising in social media. We can drive customers or potential customers to our site. And is this something that the event could work with us on? There's a do-it-yourself kind of form here that it just lets you get ready for virtual trade activity. We have a checklist for virtual event technology
that Diane covered.
That Diane has covered. We had a look at a virtual event and which feature of some of these technologies is best for virtual trade missions or virtual trade shows or B2B meetings. And so we define that as essential, desirable, or not required. And so you can have a look across that when you can get your hands on an actual document that would show if you're organizing a conference, for example, which of the things are essential and which are nice to have. The other thing that we did really was look at those event technology platform features and look at which of the technologies platforms that we've used so far with some of our events like WOVA and Six Connect and B2B to Go how do they stack up relative to those features, and we also compared some others, some Canadian technologies as well as some world ones there. But people should recognize that there are a number of evaluations of technologies that include 100 different platforms, and many of them started off being one thing and evolved into an event tech platform. And they do this by way of what they call integrations. So it's not really them who's having a B2B software, or it's not really them who's providing graphics for booths. It's some other plug-in technology. And sometimes that works seamlessly and other times it doesn't. So there's a fair bit of investigation here, especially if you're trying to decide what tech do I use for something. If the other use here would be, it's already decided what event tech is going to be used, and I just want to know what it does well and what I need to supplement in order to make it as effective as possible. So there's that event checklist. So Jessica, we have about 15 minutes remaining for questions, if there are any questions. And then as a last stage, we'll just review the 3 recommendations again to keep them top of mind.
So there was one question about the stats of virtual trade participation this year versus face-to-face participation last year. And so Crystal included in the chat a link and some information about a virtual trade conference report that was done that she referenced, talking about the numbers. I would say for the most part, a lot of this data is not available yet because the year isn't finished, which is another point that Crystal made in her comment. One thing I can tell you sort of anecdotally, looking at projects that have been happening here in Atlantic Canada, many of them have had similar numbers to last year, sort of face-to-face versus virtual this year, if not more participants. Like Diane had referenced, sometimes we're getting more and more participants because the cost differential is different to participate virtually. So I think that there's still a lot of work to be done as far as getting companies on board with this virtual process and having them see it as valuable as what the face-to-face was. But I'm looking forward to reading that article, the virtual trade report that that Crystal referenced. And Suzanne from ONB is mentioning that the preferred tech platforms for different events, we have to kind of choose them carefully. And that way clients will get used to what all the requirements are. If we're not skipping around so much, I think is what you're talking about, Suzanne, as far as, what our preferred tech platforms are when we are the ones who get to have the choice. And I agree. I think if we can find, 1 or 2 or 4 or whatever it is, depending on the option, that work well, that might be something that we can lean towards when we have influence over those decisions. But that was it for questions.
Can I chime in with just one thing? It's Crystal.
Yeah.
So as an example of what we were discussing earlier, Doug, texted me, there's something in the chat, and I was able to pull up my second computer because I knew of, this one study that may answer the question. But I can say the link I put in the chat was a survey that was done between like the middle of March and the middle of April. We're a decade away from that at this point. So just take that survey with a grain of salt, but they did qualify, from the 400 plus companies that they surveyed, they actually qualified them down to 360 companies to ensure that they had really put on a virtual event. But of those companies, only 20 had put on a virtual event before. So I think it's an interesting to read inside what they said about the percentages of companies that attended the events that they put on, or whether they were happy with whether it was the expected amount of people. But I agree completely with Suzanne. We've been trying to find that information and we haven't found it, other than this survey that is an interesting read, but take with a grain of salt. We haven't really found that hard data for you on that.
Suzanne has another question about with the company interviews. Did you find that the firms weren't really interested in virtual, or were getting fatigued by all the kind of virtual opportunities that have been presented so far?
I thought it was really interesting talking to companies who were looking at the bright side of things on a trade show that they were participating in. And they said, well, at least I was at my desk and there wasn't that much traffic in my booth, and I was able to do other things while I was manning my booth, And this was a really keen company that had good product and very well managed from a marketing perspective. But what was in the back of my mind was really the issue here is, if we're participating in virtual trade shows, what do we have to do to get enough traffic through that booth so that people don't have to multitask and look at other activities? And so that's why we spend a fair bit of time looking at what are the ways, and there is some good material there on what are the ways that we can identify those attendees ahead of time and invite them and get them to come by the booth. So I'm glad this question came out on material, because there is a fairly extensive list of sources where we gathered material. And of course, in the competitive environment of technology sales, no one wants anyone else to use their information to benefit themselves, benefit anybody other than the people who created it. So we really stayed away from being so specific that we needed to quote an article, because they were there are severe limitations on how much could be said, but there is a lot of material that we waded through, that we've categorized according to different headings that will make it easy for someone to find material. And so if somebody has the time and inclination, there's a lot of good reading material there.
And there was on the use and the benefit of the virtual trade show, we did see a slight trend on the generational side. Some of the older participants, and it's general trend, not specific, but they weren't as quick to embrace the virtual side, and they also had a tendency to believe they could go back to the way things were. Mm-hmm. And so, Suzanne, your comment on, some people are not finding it as valuable, that might impact some of that quantity. And also, I think, as we know, the amount of participation has dwindled slightly. And so that's something that we're going to have to watch as you build for the second year. You get to we're almost at the point where everyone's gone through one cycle of their trade show now. So it'll be interesting to see what the second cycle brings. And I think it's important to stress that we've done one cycle and everyone was just trying to survive. This is the second cycle, and people are trying to figure out actually how this really works in a day-to-day environment.
Okay.
I would say too, Suzanne, you mentioned manufacturers are getting sort of fatigued here, and I would say that what we have found is there could very well be differences, not in terms of generational differences that Doug mentioned, but just industry-specific differences. So. And the nature of the selling process, that sales funnel it would be different in the biotech industry versus, manufacturers using the high tech, machine learning, maybe very different sales processes, and therefore the digital technology platform itself may be valued more highly. Say some of the feedback that we got from. Jeff, yourself, and also Betsy and one other participant in bio, as an example, is that actually it's a lot, number one, so this science-based industry, it's a lot easier to get in front of big pharma, if you're a small biotech. If you are prepared and you have that nice professional pitch, and you have a niche therapy or drug or medical device that is trending, that the digital platform connecting the small biotech with big pharma actually gets you faster and more impactfully in front of the right people. And we hear that actually it's easier now to get to research big pharma, figure out who's going to bio, who are the executives within Pfizer who are going to be there, and then request the meeting. And if you are prepared with your digital assets as a small biotech, you're likely to get the meeting. And the way in which big pharma now is sifting through all the digital material that is sent to them from these small biotechs is very interesting. They're learning how to sift through it quickly, even to the point where if they get even a 3 or 15-minute video from a small biotech, your computer can actually speed up the viewing speed, if you will, to double time. So you can get through twice as many presentations as you could in the past face-to-face using the digital technology. It's a faster IPO now. Again, small firms looking at an IPO market. So all because of the digital presence. That doesn't mean, though, that there aren't challenges with the biosystem. For example, the B2B matching software is a different platform from the actual conference platform technology, and the integration of the two is not always as smooth, and there are other challenges. But from that industry, there seems to be a real interest to continue with some sort of, with maybe hybrid going on for sure, and some other functional aspects fully digital. With the manufacturing, I don't have feedback on that in particular, but again, it's other feedback in terms of challenges of the virtual. Some people just are more comfortable selling face-to-face. They want that interaction and they value it, right? And so you have two extremes, and then you have people in the middle who are willing to kind of be a little bit more precise in terms of what activities are digital, virtual, and which activities are face-to-face, and how they approach them going forward. But I do think it can be sector specific for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's
sorry, on one thing that Diane or that Suzanne mentions as well, you have to consider your own primary purpose for attending the event. And for some companies, it can be an inexpensive way to do market intelligence, right? If your goal is market intelligence from the event, you don't have to travel there now. That might be the reason that you're attending a certain event this year, and maybe meetings are next year. So you make a good point.
Yeah, and I think even from that evaluatory stage, when we're looking at whether or not, as government or industry partners that are trying to choose one event over another, or whether we just notify our companies this event is occurring, but we don't, pull a delegation together. I do think, Suzanne, and trying to understand what we think the bigger win out of that for us as organizers and for the companies, what their goal is. I do think that's a huge part of us sort of evaluating these moving forward. And I think it's also really good language to have the companies thinking in those directions. A lot of these shows are things often where people attend because they've always attended, or there's a keeping up with the Joneses. They kind of, all the ocean tech companies have to go to OI London because it is just a thing you do. And so I think it's interesting now with the cost being different, with travel, et cetera, that smaller firms can participate that might not have been able to before. And larger firms can bring a bigger presence than they might have brought before. So I do think there's certainly some interesting things we can look at as far as our own decision making to determine what we should be doing next.
I would also add too, by the way, I was just thinking about, Suzanne, your comment and others about the dwindling sales pipeline for manufacturers, but at the same time, this is just anecdotal. Here in Georgia, we have the Georgia Manufacturers Association, and we had a discussion. This would have been maybe, say, 3 months ago, around just this kind of discussion. Who's selling? How is the pandemic impacting your business, basically? And in that value chain within manufacturing, you've got the actual manufacturers, but then you have service providers, you have software developers and technology providers to the manufacturers. And that latter group, the software developers and technology providers, actually, they were seeing a booming business because the manufacturers using the software and technology realized that they needed to create some efficiencies. They're having to cut costs. Their revenue is decreasing. So how do they actually remain profitable? Well, you can cut costs by actually investing in technology that helps them reduce their costs in different areas. So that segment of the value chain, when you look just generally manufacturing with the technology providers themselves, they were booming. Yes, the manufacturers were certainly experiencing a decrease in revenue or a pivot towards new sets of customers, or focusing in more on repeat customers as opposed to generating new customers. So I'm not sure what that means generally for how, when you're talking with your companies or the manufacturing sector generally. But I think that it would be important to kind of drill down a little bit more in the value chain there to see how a VTA may actually be helpful to grow sales.
I think just in wrapping up, we've presented a pretty good roadmap for what companies need to do. And number one on the list was really reassess that sales process. And one thing that could entail is expanding the role that channel partners are playing, distributors, agents, people in the marketplace, and with connections that are across a number of different products and a number of different suppliers. It could be that they'd be making a comeback or that they'd be used more than they have been in recent times. They used to be a major part of the channel, and then a lot more things were happening direct, but the world has kind of shrunk, and it could be that having people in the marketplace who can take that product forward will increasingly play a role. Jessica, I guess we're out of time here now. Do you want to wrap up, or do you want to take more questions?
I think that's it for questions. Suzanne was sort of agreeing with Diane and thinking about our next steps. So there isn't any more questions. So I think you can do your last sort of wrap up of recommendations.
Well, I've had them posted up there, and I imagine that people have a chance to have read them. And I think we did cover them in detail the first go round, but I think they're three. The first two are eminently achievable, and number three is a bit of a longer term process, but it definitely is something that needs to be started right away because there's an impending need for that kind of backup. So I'd just like to say thank you on behalf of the MAI team for letting us work on this project. It's really an exciting and important one, and really appreciate everyone coming out today to participate in the event.
So there is another one of these sessions that will be identical to today, tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And then there was a French one scheduled for Friday morning, although there has not been a ton of uptake on that one as yet. So if you have colleagues that you think this would be good value content for them, that they should be seeing, hearing, etc., there is still room in the session that's running tomorrow at 1 o'clock. As I said, it'll be the same content as this, and the Zoom link was sent around to everybody for all of the sessions. And we very much appreciate you participating. We know we have a long road ahead of us to work with our companies and help them remove barriers from their path that have been put there by COVID and all of the changes that have spun out from that. And I think that the work that the MAI team has done will certainly get us, gives us a roadmap, and we'll be able to leverage and move forward much more quickly with our operational planning this year to be able to engage over the next couple of years and keep things moving forward for our company. So thanks to everyone for participating. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.